John Du Bois with the City Legal Department. I have nothing to report and stand for any questions.
I've got none. Any of the other commissioners?
I have none.
Well, thank you for making the trek down there, Mr. Du Bois.
Well, thank you.
Okay, APD. Now we had a partial discussion of both progressive discipline and the lapel camera, but I'm assuming that there is more to be said about that.
Do you need to give your report first?
No, sir, you go ahead.
Okay. I'll do his report real quick and make sure I can say everything that's on there, right?
Yes, sir.
Okay, so I cases received 13, 0 cases inactivated, 0 cases mitigated. Total for May was 14. Discipline issued, 1 verbal reprimand, 9 letters for reprimand, 1 suspension of 8 hours, 1 suspension of 16 hours, 1 suspension of 120 hours, and 1 suspension of 240 hours. Cases pending are 13. Year to date, so 109. Questions?
I have a question. I look at this chart of sanctions and I don't see 240 days suspension on
Right, and that's a heavy suspension.
here. Yes, and I was curious as to what,
I can't speak to the case of what.
just saying generally, what would it take to get a long-term suspension?
It would have to be aggravating circumstances, and then also the severity of the case. And so that's a hefty suspension. So I guess.
That's my question.
But yeah, and it's hard to say because without knowing the case, because I absolutely have no clue what the case was. So I really can't speak to what resulted into that, but 240 hours is a hefty suspension.
And I wasn't asking you to address that specific
Right.
case. I was just saying, for example.
Right. You know, I can't give you one off the top of my head. Just please realize that's a severe suspension if you're looking at 160 hours in a month, and we're looking at a 240-hour suspension.
And Deputy Chief, that's without pay, is that correct?
That's correct, without pay. And most of the time, and I can't speak to this one, but it's served continuously
Until it's finished.
until it's finished. There in the past, I know that they have broken some up to where they had to do 80-hour blocks at a time, but I don't know what the situation was with this one.
Deputy Chief, and you, I'm reluctant to ask this question, but this question is in relation to the contract with the union as it pertains to disciplinary action. Would you like to kind of enlighten us as to what those agreements are and how this maybe not necessarily negotiations, but how this interacts between the department and the officers union?
I
You
can't.
don't need to, if you don't
Right.
want to.
I can't speak to the current contract because it's still in negotiations and stuff, and I'm not a part of that. I can speak to past, to the way that that's worked. And the way that it usually works is whenever an officer is investigated by the RO or IA, they do usually have union representation there. Sometimes the attorneys are there. Once it goes up through the chain of command and it comes to where they have a pre-disciplinary hearing about it, then where they're able to come in to myself or a major and say this is the reasoning behind it or whatever their explanation is to try to mitigate the circumstances. They'll usually have a representation from the union. When it goes 40 hours or more of a suspension, then that is heard by the chief, not myself, and so they'll usually have representation at that point. I'm not sure if that answers your question with it. And that's where the union will come in and plead their side, and the chief will make his decision based upon that. Yes, sir.
I'd like to get back to the lapel camera, if I
Okay.
may, sir. You mentioned earlier that for other reasons, the department is not able to amend or rework the existing lapel camera SOP. can you expand on the reasons for that?
Right, currently, as you know, we're in negotiations with, right now, there's talks between the department and the Department of Justice. And so right now, it'd be premature for us to put something out, and then if they came back out and said, nope, we want you to do it this way. So at this time, everything's kind of in a holding pattern, as the Commissioner had said, or talked about, there's no SOP revisions right now. Most of our SOP revisions right now are stuff that we feel comfortable that we can move forward with. So there's several issues that we would like to address with the camera policy, but at this point, we just can't move forward yet. I kind of spoke a little bit earlier too. I was out as major city chiefs and specifically about lapel cameras and stuff. I'm assuming this is what y'all wanted me to talk about. I've had a lot of exposure in the last year to lapel cameras from other agencies around the country. One of the questions I think was asked was what is the policies that other agencies are using? We're probably, and I could be wrong, but the last I checked, we are the largest agencies that are requiring all of our officers to carry cameras. We're also the only agency that I know of that are requiring our officers to report every interaction with the citizens. An example of that would be Oakland, who's getting ready to come out of their consent decree with the Department of Justice. Oakland's policy is that they're to initiate their cameras prior to making contact with an individual, but once they are in contact with an individual, if it's not confrontational, they can cut theirs off. Our policy doesn't allow that. A lot of other agencies have in their policy to where only certain calls are required to be recorded. Domestic calls, stuff like it. Similar to our old tape recorder policy where we had a list of 14 calls that had to be recorded, the other ones didn't. The big thing is most of your major cities don't have the cameras that we have. If you look at other ones, they might be experimenting with 10 cameras or 50 cameras here at certain places, but they don't have the majority like we do at this time. It's a major issue nationwide, trying to figure out what is best practices around the country. The International Chief of Police just released their findings recently of what they saw as a best practice on the camera policy, but nowhere is there one that says this is the way to go, this is the way to go. Everybody's struggling with it, trying to figure out what technology works, what's the best policy, and what is capable for their officers to actually follow them. The other issue that we have is storage of the videos once they're recorded and retention. Like I said before, we're talking about terabytes of memory that are being held. So especially for smaller agencies, that's really cost prohibitive. So there's this big ongoing discussion in the police community among major city chiefs of how do we best do this and what is the best practice.
Deputy Chief, when a person records an incident, he downloads this into some file. How long is that file kept?
It depends. If it's
evidence, then that's
if it's
different.
evidence, it's going to fall under the rules of evidentiary. If it's just a casual contact and nothing, it stays for 120 days and then drops off.
Drops off, meaning that it's erased?
It's deleted. It depends. There's two different ways right now because we have the 3 different platforms that we have. If it's as an Axon camera, it gets loaded to evidence.com, and it's a virtual cloud storage. And that one has it where unless it's flagged for retention or it's evidentiary in nature, then it does get deleted. The other one is if you have the Scorpion or you have the GoPro, which the tactical units have on their call-out gear, those they have to actually physically download to a disk and it gets tagged into evidence. So those are the 2 different platforms.
But now, if it is not, I lost my train of thought there, old age. It's my understanding when I've done my ride-alongs with officers, that they will go ahead, and a lot of officers will keep their own copies. They'll download it to one of their personal disks, and they'll also download it to the department's disk, or the department's website. Can an officer go in after he downloads it and changes it, and change anything in that tape?
No, the way that the tapes are set up, you cannot go in and manipulate the information on there. All you can do is view or download. You can go in and add a case number to it, so that it's easier to track and stuff, but to actually manipulate the actual recording on there, what I'm told from the people of the companies and from our experts within the department deal with it is no.
Okay, because there have been some accusations that officers have deleted some of their tapes.
Right, and the thing is with, especially with the evidence.com ones, those, it has an audit trail that shows everything. It shows, like, if I go in to review an officer's videotape on evidence.com, it shows that I went in and looked at it. If I download a disc of it, it shows that I downloaded a disc of it. Now with the Scorpions and stuff, it's the same thing. The files, the way that they're set up, you can't go in and start chopping them apart and erasing stuff into them. It's
Last but not least, there are some issues over the lapel camera. I mean, that's, if you look at in the paper or any of the stations, there are some issues with the thing. We are having discussions with our IRO to say, wait a minute here, the SOP basically says this. And if that person turns it off, if it's on and then it goes off, if it doesn't go on, we want you to sustain her, that particular officer, because that is a violation of the SOP. So we are in a dilemma, as you are in a dilemma. You're now telling me that that portion of the SOP is not going to be changed until the Department of Justice blesses it.
right. As far as I know, that it's not going to be changed in the upcoming close future. I too have issues about with some of the terminology and the way it's worded. Me and Ms. Hammer have spoken about that in the past. I've spoken about it to you all in the past and with my concerns with it. You know, we're trying to do the best we can based on the technology, and when the SOP was written, it was written to try to capture that, and so I really don't know what to say except for, yeah, you're correct. Right now, it does say that they have to report it in its entirety, and it doesn't give for any kind of accidents or anything. If the officer does his best to try to comply with the SOP, does everything that he can to, and the equipment fails, there's nothing that says, hey, he did exactly what he was supposed to do. He or she did exactly what they're supposed to do. This was not their fault. It's just not there right now. On the converse side of it, as I said earlier, is if you can show that they didn't do what they're supposed to do, or they cut it off when they should have been reporting it, that's a different ballgame, and that's where we need to come in with progressive discipline and charter sanctions.
Thank you, sir. Thank you for your information.
So, ABQ President, was there further, I know we had you on the spot to discuss lapel policy and the progressive discipline. Did you have, we kind of coming at you from different angles with questions and stuff. Did you have more that you had to say on either of those issues, or did we pretty much cover that?
You know what, I'll be honest, I didn't really come in with anything to discuss except to try to answer questions the best I can and be as forthcoming as I can with it, where we're at. Back to the disciplinary system, I've given a copy of the charter sanction. I'll give you the rest of our whole SOP that's on discipline, the way it works, and especially the way that it works with progressive discipline, and how if you have multiple offenses within one incident and they're both falling within the same area of the charter sanctions, how that jumps up to the next level because they're both there. So if you had somebody who was disciplined because they had 3 violations and they're all verbal reprimands, well, that verbal reprimand, since they're all Sanction 7s, actually jumps up 2 offenses because you have multiple offenses. So it is built in there and it is looked at, and these are the minimum chart of sanctions that we use.
With those disciplines, is there training that goes along with that?
Right. The current trend, as y'all know, when I took over Internal Affairs, it's been about 1.5 years ago now. One of the things that we implemented is that if someone was going to issue someone discipline, that I wanted to see training attached to it in some shape or form or manner that actually helped to improve the situation. The way my personal view of this is you have intentional misconduct and you have accidental misconduct. Intentional misconduct needs to be handled severely, where unintentional misconduct that needs to correct the behavior, and usually through training is the best way to do that. So what we've started to do is, if somebody has a violation, whether it's intentional or not, if they're in violation, their training needs to be attached in some shape, form, or manner, whether it be through the academy, through our online training center, through sitting down through a performance improvement plan that carries out through the 90 days. But some kind of training needs to be attached to address the issues with a follow-up plan attached to it. So currently, that's what we're doing with most of our disciplines that comes through my shop that I see. And so, correct me if I'm wrong, that's mostly what's going on through most of the IU cases that come through.
I have one more.
Mhm.
Deputy Chief, one of the things that we have talked about as far as the commission is concerned is that once we either concur or not concur with the IRO, and it goes to the chief, and the chief concurs or doesn't concur, we have no way of knowing what that discipline was. And we've always been curious as to what does the department do with our recommendations, and what kind of discipline does the department administer to that person in relation to our findings? Is there any way that we can get some type of feedback, or is it just a personnel issue and it remains a personnel?
Yeah, I believe at that point it becomes a personnel issue to where we can't come in and say, Johnny was sustained in the RO office and Johnny received X. We can come in and do like we did today and report that this many hours of suspensions and stuff was done, because at this point it does become a personnel issue and is covered under the contract and protected under the personnel stuff, is my understanding of it. So,
Chair Peterson and Commissioner Foster, after in November of 2013, when we received a cease and desist letter from the APOA regarding the letters were changed at that point to include the discipline in cases in which officers were sustained. So if you look at the end of the draft letters of your cases that you receive, it typically says this is the discipline that the chief found to be appropriate in this case. And so on CPCs, the contract does allow that the commission as well as the public, because those are public records, to know what the discipline of the chief thought was appropriate.
So, and to answer a little further, once it gets back and you get to discipline, then it goes through that process with the charge sanctions, as well as the sanction violation of the SOP, and that's how it's mitigated or handed out, the discipline.
Okay. Well, again, Deputy Chief President, I appreciate all the information you shared with us today, and I appreciate your time this afternoon.
Yes, sir.
Okay, other business and commission recommendations. Anything other business from either of the commissioners? Hearing none, I'll assume that's a no. And I guess this meeting is adjourned at 16:27.
It's 1727.
1727, good job, Sailor.
Oh, it's 16:27 where I'm at.
Can we keep this?
Yes, you
Okay.
that's a copy of the policy.
Hey, I'm gonna sign out.
Okay, you're out, we're out.
We're out.
Don't call me, it'll break the Open Meetings Act.